Chimpanzees. They share 98.7% of our DNA, making them the closest living relative to humans. They are like us in a lot of ways. They are intelligent, emotional, and even have opposable thumbs. Another way that chimps are like us is that they are very social primates. They have the ability to form friendships and usually live in large families of up to 120 animals. Today we are going to take a look at a study done at a wildlife center in Tanzania, looking at how the social and grooming habits of chimps affects their susceptibility to parasites. Scientists are very interested to know what factors affect a chimp's ability to make friends with other chimps and what the possible consequences of these friendships are. Just like humans, when chimps spend a lot of time with each other, they are more likely to make each other sick. We know that this is the case for things like viruses and bacterial infections, but does the group behavior of chimps affect the transmission of parasites? A new study in the Journal of Behavioral Ecology and Sociobiology investigated whether this effect was the same for parasites. Are chimpanzees that spend a lot of time in groups more likely to be infected with parasites? Will they have more parasites than chimps who spend more time alone? Because we can't speak to chimpanzees and ask them about this, we have to find the answers to these questions in a different way. Using science. Standing around with a lab coat and a clipboard does not make someone a good scientist. Good scientists must be verifiable, repeatable, and objective. Verifiable, meaning that the science can be tested again and again and the same thing will be true every time. Repeatable, meaning that the experiment can be done by other scientists or at a different time and the results will remain the same. And objective, meaning that the scientists performing the experiment do not have any biases and they do not hope that the experiment goes one way or another. We can make sure our science has these qualities by using the scientific method. The scientific method is a series of careful steps that scientists must follow to make sure the science they are doing is reliable and accurate. Let's take a look at the steps of the scientific method. First, as scientists, we must make an observation and ask a question. This step is what gives us a reason to perform an experiment in the first place. Based on our question or observation, we then form a hypothesis. A hypothesis proposes an answer to the question or observation and gives us scientists something to base the rest of our experiment on. Then we have to investigate. This is where it gets exciting. This step is usually when we perform experiments to test our hypothesis and put our scientific knowledge to the test. The results of our experiment are then collected as data and observations to take a look at what actually happened during the investigation stage. We then take what we learned from our experiment and analyze the data to get our final results. This is when we find out if our experiment worked as expected and evaluate whether or not we have to go back and try it again. Like all good scientists do, the researchers in this study followed the scientific method while conducting their research to make sure the results they got are going to follow those 3 requirements we talked about earlier. First, they had to ask a question. Why do we care about parasites in chimps in the first place? Like many scientists do, these researchers based their study on previous research done by other scientists. Other scientists looked at how seasons affected parasite transmission and found there were some pretty significant differences. So these researchers picked up where the others left off and continued looking into other factors that cause chimps to become infected with parasites. Then it was time to make a hypothesis. The scientists that performed this study hypothesized that chimpanzees that had a bigger social circle or played a bigger role in their social circle would be more likely to become infected with parasites. The researchers looked at a few different factors to test their hypothesis. They looked at the number of parasites in each season, the number of parasites in male versus female chimps, and mainly the number of parasites found in chimps who spent more time with other chimps. Then it was time to get to work and perform the experiment. The researchers in the study observed a group of 39 chimpanzees for a span of 6 years. All of the animals were easily identifiable and were comfortable with the human researchers. The team conducted 3 mini-experiments that together made up the entire study. First, they completed what they called full-day follows, where they followed each individual chimp for 1 entire day to observe their social habits. They took note of which and how many individuals each chimp interacted with. Next, they recorded the grooming events of each individual chimp for an entire day to see which chimps participated in the most grooming with the most other animals. Lastly, they collected a total of 381 fecal samples from the group of chimps to examine parasite contents. They looked at the number of parasites as well as the diversity of different types of parasites in each sample. They also noted, throughout the period of study, differences between male and female chimps, as well as the amount of parasites found in each season. Then it was time for them to analyze their findings. They looked at 2 different factors. First, association contact, aka parasites that have been passed through shared living environments, as well as grooming contact, which is parasites passed directly through grooming behaviors with other chimpanzees. After analyzing the chimps' behaviors through observations, it was time to look at the fecal samples. The researchers carefully removed parasite eggs and larvae from the samples and looked at them under a microscope. They found a total of 8 different parasites that were all known to be environmentally transmitted. They then used a whole bunch of fancy statistics to analyze the relationship between association contact and the environment. What they found was that the social and grooming behaviors of chimpanzees did not show a significant increase or decrease in the number of parasites they contracted. They also reaffirmed the previous research that more parasites are present in the late to dry season and found no significant differences between male and female chimpanzees. So, in the end, their hypothesis was only partially supported. They concluded that living in shared spaces may increase the number of parasites, but that parasites are not more likely to be transmitted directly through grooming behaviors. This is likely because the majority of the parasites they found live in the intestines and have a life cycle too complicated to be transmitted through grooming. The researchers suggested that these parasites are likely picked up through the consumption of contaminated food or water. So, like most other studies in science, the findings of this research remain somewhat inconclusive, and more research needs to be done to find out exactly how chimpanzees contract and transmit parasites. What we do know, though, is that chimpanzees probably don't pass parasites to one another through grooming, so they can go right ahead and continue eating bugs off of each other all day long. Thanks for watching, and be sure to stay tuned next time for our next video on More Things Science.